A lot of magic tricks this morning for our Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Jen, and today our goal is to be talking about deep sea and bioluminescence. So hopefully that little dark deep sea introduction got you interested in talking a little bit about one of my favorite things, which is the light that is found deep into the ocean. Of course, I'm not joined alone in the studio today. Some other folks that also are joining me in the studio are Kaya, who just brought in a comment from DBA Homeschool. Wow! So it's awesome. Glad you're inspired by our introduction this morning. And helping me to make that happen is Cynthia, who is on our computer today. So I'm very excited to be talking about bioluminescence and the deep sea. If you are also excited and want to share any comments or questions that you might have, go on ahead, send in your text. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at 562-286-1838. And if this happens to be not October 1st at 10 a.m., at least between 10 and 10:30 a.m. this morning, you can go on ahead and email us live at live@lbaop.org, and we'll be able to answer your question as soon as we can. But let's go on ahead and get started, shall we? So, if you had to think about the deep sea, it's a place that I've definitely I've been wanting to visit or have been thinking about ever since I was a little kid. And so I was wondering if you happen to have any kind of like what your vision is of the deep sea, or if there's anything that really inspires you about the deep sea, or you think that is really cool. Love to hear all of your thoughts, because I think it's really important for us to be able to think about, well, why is the deep sea important, right? How do we view the deep sea? And also, how do scientists view the deep sea? So we're all one community working together. So first of all, we think about the deep sea, right? We saw that it was totally black because light does not penetrate as deep and deep and deep down you go, right? We slowly start losing the colors as we move deeper down into the ocean. But when it's super deep, like over here, right, all we have is maybe our robot that we use to be able to visit the deep sea, or maybe a submarine to help us illuminate or show us what the ocean floor looks like. And so here's one example of an ocean floor, right? But here we are, we're visiting a place that's almost like it's outer space, right? It's obviously not as far as being out into space, but it's definitely an out of this world experience where animals look so incredibly different and have some really cool adaptations. Now, if we think about the deep sea, right, there are certain limitations that we as humans face, that we can't just, swim on down there because of all that pressure, right? So for every about 33 feet of water, there's about, I think it's, oh no, I just blanked on the amount of pressure that there is. But there are like many pounds of pressure that are on top of you. And so with that, right, as it compounds, because we have several thousands of feet deep that we're going, that's a lot of pressure that is actually on a person or an object or even an animal. Now, not only are we having lots and lots of pressure that's squeezed onto us, but it also is really cold. We're talking about like 3 degrees or 4 degrees centigrade, right? So we're talking pretty cold water temperatures. And so with that, animals have to have special adaptations to be able to, well, live in a really cold environment. Can you think of other limitations or other struggles that they might face living in super deep waters? So far we have pressure, temperature. What else comes to mind? Well, lack of light, right? We just talked about that earlier. So basically these animals are in darkness 24/7, right? All the time it's dark for them. Well, with it being that dark, do you think there's a lot of life that is down in the deep sea? Do you think there's as much life down there as there might be in a kelp forest or a coral reef per se? Well, in this particular picture, maybe not so much, right? In the deep sea, there are can think of it as a really vast landscape, right? There's lots of land down on the deep sea floor, but there are little pockets of kind of like little miniature cities. Sometimes there's, rural places where there's not a lot of animals in one spot. Maybe they all live independently or individually of each other. And there's a lot of expansive land between them, right? So they're just swimming and swimming till eventually they find someone else nearby. Other times you might get a hustle and bustling city, like at a dead whale fall, for example, where dead whales provide tons and tons of nutrients and food for animals to be able to eat. Or maybe you're near a hydrothermal vent where you don't even need any kind of photosynthesis to survive. Instead, you are able to utilize a lot of bacteria found from warm areas where we have magma coming up, and it creates a lot of steam and a lot of really amazing nutrients that are utilized by a lot of animals. And that's where we might find a whole variety of creatures, right? So there are kind of like these little towns here and a few towns there. And here's an example of a hydrothermal vent. This one happens to be labeled for further research. And so with that, here is basically an area where basically 3 degrees centigrade might go on ahead and meet, places that are hundreds degrees, right? So we have a huge difference in temperature, and it's creating all of this hot water that's being pressed up, and all of this is basically being spewed out along with a lot of great different kinds of nutrients that are wonderful for a lot of other animals to use, especially bacteria. Bacteria love it there, right? Now, these are just a few of the glimpses of different kinds of habitats. Now, today we are talking about the deep sea, right? And some of the areas, or no matter where you are, even if you're near hydrothermal vents or maybe far out in the more rural areas, right, where there's not as many animals, you might be on that sea floor level, like all of these pictures that we've been seeing. Or maybe you're the deep sea, but you're not all the way at the bottom. Maybe you're kind of somewhere in between where all you see is darkness above, darkness to the sides, and then darkness underneath, because there's just nothing but water all around you, right? Hello, 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 hello. Not that there'd be echoes, but I can imagine that there might be, right? And so here, where there's tons and tons of darkness, basically, animals have to, find a way to find each other, right? And so one way that they could do that is through bioluminescence. If we go on ahead and we use that word, bioluminescence, and we break it down, we can break it down into 2 parts. We have the bio and we have the luminescence part. And I'm going to write that word down so you all can get a chance to see it too, in case writing things out kind of helps you. We have bioluminescence. All right, so here we have it. Bioluminescence, right? Oops, looks like I may have erased parts of the C and of the E right here, right? Bioluminescence. So, if we look at it, right, we know that bio actually means life, right? So this is our life right here. Now, what does it mean to luminesce? You're thinking to light up. You're absolutely right, right? So these animals actually light up, which is incredible. Now, this is a little bit different. This is our flower jelly, flower hat jelly that we have right here. And not all animals will bioluminesce, but some of them will kind of fluoresce and offer different kinds of light. So this is something else that's really common, that's very similar to bioluminescence. And so some of these animals will have this blue light. Now, here's an example of another animal, which is of a type of slug, I think, within our ocean environment. And so this animal, or sea butterfly, is that right, Cynthia? Worm. Oh, sorry. So worm. So guess I was closer with the slug. And so with this worm that we have right here, actually different phylum, so just kidding. But with this right here, we have a glowing worm, which is pretty incredible. And so with this worm that we have, right, it has little areas where there's light coming out of it. Now, this light can come about in a variety of ways. Some ways include, basically that they can mix some chemicals that they can find inside of them. So if you imagine kind of like a glow stick, right? When you first get your glow stick, it's basically, well, not glowing. It's just a stick, right? And then you go on ahead and you might crack it and you might shake it up, right? And basically what ends up happening is you have these chemicals that are mixing together and it's creating a light. Well, our ocean animals do something very similar. They have two chemicals inside of them. They have luciferin and luciferase. And when those two combine, they go on ahead and create a different component as well as some light. And so with that together, you end up getting this blue light that we see here. Now, this worm is only one example of a type of animal that does kind of create that living light. And what's really interesting is that animals that do create it, well, it's actually considered a cold light. Now, just to kind of think about lights, right? If we think about a light bulb or the sun, right? If we stand out in it, or we put our hands up to a light bulb and we touch it, I put my hand up because there's light bulbs above me, right? Or if you're going to change a light bulb, right? You want to make sure the lights are off and you wait a little bit because that light bulb gets really hot. And that's because we lose a lot of heat. That energy is coming out in the form of heat right there. And so we feel it, that's hot. Well, these animals are incredibly energy efficient, so much so that their blue light is not hot. It is considered a cool light. Not cool because it's awesome, though it for sure is, right? But also because they really reduce the amount of energy that's expelled when creating this light. Very important when you live in a really deep environment where there's not a ton of food, right? So what do you think might be some ways in which animals use this bioluminescence? What do you think? Feel free to send those texts on in. How do you think these animals go on ahead and use that bioluminescence? We did get a question, so I'm going to hold off on that real quick from DVA Homeschool about hydrothermal vents, so I'll get to that next. But if we think about these animals and how they use this blue light, well, I kind of think of a famous ocean movie, right? I might see it as a type of lure, right? Having one little glowy spot, just like Cal I kind of did at the very beginning, right? It's kind of like, what is that? I'm curious. Let me get a little bit closer. So there's some animals that'll use it as a lure to be able to attract food over. They can go ahead and then eat it. What do you think might be some other ways that they use that bright light? So we know for food. I know. For food again. Maybe they go on ahead and use it to not only be able to attract prey, but maybe to help these animals kind of use it as a cloaking device. There's one animal that we're going to touch base upon that talks about it. Ooh, and DVA Homeschool says to find food. Absolutely, right? So they might use it to shine light on to be able to maybe find some food nearby as well, right? Because we talked about there really isn't a lot of light that's there, for sure. Or maybe even to find a mate, right? So once again, it's really tricky sometimes to be able to find maybe a boy fish or a girl fish out there in the vast open ocean that's really deep. And so these animals might use it to be like, hi, is anyone out there? I'm a anglerfish. Any other anglerfish out there? I'd love to meet you, right? And so that might be another way that they could use it. So there's lots of different reasons for that. And as a matter of fact, here is a picture of an angler. I'm going to step out of screen for a little bit. And with that, basically, just take a look at it real quick. It's a very odd looking fish, and a lot of other animals that we're going to be looking at are really odd. So let's go on ahead. I'm going to give you a minute. Feel free to send in your observations too. What do you notice? What even about the shape of the animal? Well, I definitely noticed that it is kind of like a football shape, right? And so with that, it's kind of an odd body shape. Doesn't really have too many fins, does it? Or like not big fins. So here we can kind of see a small fin here. Not too many fins up above or down below. You can kind of see some fins are almost clear, right? Right over here too. And then we have that classic lure right over here, which is pretty incredible to see it kind of bounce up and down. And then we have a big upturned mouth, right? It's important that this mouth is turned upwards so that way it can help go on ahead and eat whatever that fish is that might be attracted to that particular lure right there, right? So this is just one example of a really interesting animal, very round animal. Interesting eye too, by the way, right? And so all of these different modifications and even the color of the animal really help us get a better understanding of the deep sea. Now, even though this animal does look huge, as many deep sea pictures really kind of want to show like the beautiful aspects and the uniqueness of these animals, but believe it or not, these animals are usually fairly small, like, you know, this size or thereabouts. So they are quite tiny, depending upon the variety, right? And so many of these animals are quite small. So much so that as explorers check out the deep sea, many times on their submarines or their remotely operated vehicles, they will have a little scale bar. And that scale bar is denoted by two laser beams that point out, right? They either usually are like red or green in color, and that span is always about 10 centimeters. And so that gives you perspective and better understanding of the size of many of these animals that you're looking at, because it's really hard when you're looking at the deep sea. All right, so DVA Homeschool is asking, how hot are thermal vents? And they can actually get up to, I want to say, like 700 degrees Fahrenheit, so they can be quite warm. Ooh, and DVA also mentions that colors help them blend in with the deep sea. Yeah, right? So that angular black coloration definitely helps them to camouflage. So these hydrothermal vents are, as I mentioned, really hot, about 700 degrees Fahrenheit, and maybe about like 33, 35-ish degrees Fahrenheit, the water temperature. So 35 versus 700, that's a huge variance between those two temperatures. And many of these animals, believe it or not, can thrive right here. Now, what's really interesting about hydrothermal vents is that there are several different varieties, and the different varieties kind of spew out different chemicals. And with that comes different kinds of communities that are present within these hydrothermal vents. Not only is it really kind of at the source, like we're seeing here, but there are different communities the further out you go. So different animals have different adaptations that allow them to thrive either very close to the hydrothermal vents or further away. And so it's really interesting to see what some of those different adaptations are. Now, we are talking a little bit about bioluminescence today, and so we're going to shift some of our gears a little bit away from these hydrothermal vent communities, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those animals that are actually kind of related to the anglerfish that we talked about a little bit ago. And so, but if you do have any other hydrothermal vent questions, I'd be happy to answer them, because they are definitely one of my favorite areas to talk about. I actually had a chance to visit a hydrothermal vent, not me personally, but I wasn't in like a submarine, but I was definitely part of a team on an expedition down in the Gulf of California looking at hydrothermal vents over 3,000 meters deep. And so that was an incredible experience. So anytime, if you have any questions about hydrothermal vents, feel free to send them on in. But in regards to the deep sea, right, because all of these animals do have those special adaptations, whether it be closer to hydrothermal vents or further away from hydrothermal vents. But one of my all-time favorites is actually considered a frogfish. And so with that, they're very odd-looking fish, and these are some of my favorite animals are looking at these odd fish. I'm going to step out of the screen for a second so that way you can see said fish. And this is a cousin to our angler. Can you see why? Aside from that adorable face that we're seeing here, you might be able to see a little, almost like miniature lure right over here, which is pretty interesting to notice, right? And so these have that similar body shape, but in this case, really brightly colored, because some of these live a little bit higher up in the water column or in the ocean than some of our angler fish. But Reds and purples are some of the colors that really are the first ones to go away as you go deeper and deeper into the ocean. And so this coloration, even though it seems really bright and loud to us, is actually quite muted underneath the water and almost looks gray or even black to animals that are seeing it with their eyes here. So this animal is also a very stealthy predator. Much like its anglerfish friend, it's able to use that lure right there to kind of help bring in food, and it's more of an ambush predator too. Now another cousin of this frogfish and angler family are going to be sea toads. Do you get the relation there? Frogfish, sea toad, angler. Right? So sea toad and frogfish, I'm not sure if they're more closely related to each other than they are to the angler. But another really interesting animal. This one is found a little bit deeper, and so I'm going to step off the screen again so you can get a nice view of the sea toad right here. Now, any similarities or differences that you notice with our sea toad here? Notice anything similar between our angler and our frogfish and our sea toad? Well, for me, the lovable shape, right? Very much a round balloon or football shape itself, right? It has a lure, which I think I heard Kaya say. So that's lure is actually right here. It almost looks like a white pom-pom, and it's actually a modified fin that it uses to kind of push out and pull in right there. So that's really cool. That upturned mouth, right, or that frowny face again, as we're seeing it head on, right? So that is a classic description too. And also, what's interesting about this one is it has all of these hairs or spikes on it that help protect it, which is really cool. And it has that red color again, right? That helps it to camouflage in that deep sea. So all of these animals kind of have similar characteristics of either a lure. Now for our anglerfish, that one does have that bioluminescence, while these ones kind of have a different lure-like function, but operate in a very similar way. Now, one of my favorite types of bioluminescent animals, though, is the bobtail squid. Who doesn't love a good cephalopod, right? And so with these animals, they are definitely related to octopus and nautiluses and cuttlefish and other squids of sorts. And so here we have one, and all you can see is basically its body right now. It kind of looks all those other animals, like a round football, right? This shape right here. And all of its tentacles are currently buried underneath the sand. That is because during the daytime, these animals, they try to nestle themselves into the sand so that way they are less recognizable by other animals, especially predators, that may want to eat something tasty like our friend right here. And so what they do is they're able to kind of nestle themselves in and hide and kind of sleep during the daytime. Now, during that time, they are actually growing a symbiotic type of bacteria. It's a type of Vibrio fischeri, I think. And with that one in particular, this Vibrio bacteria can bioluminesce, or it can glow. So sometimes some animals don't have the Luciferin and Luciferase inside of them. Sometimes they have a bacteria that helps them out too. And in this case, it happens to be a symbiotic relationship, right? Type of relationship that in a way actually benefits both of these animals right here. So it's definitely more of a mutualistic symbiosis where these animals both get a chance to benefit. And so if you're wondering, well, how do the bacteria benefit from being inside of this guy right here? And that's because these bacteria are given sugars and amino acids, so that way they are happy and healthy and they can multiply and grow inside of our squid right here. And our squid are able to use it in several ways. One theory is that these bacteria start to glow when it happens to be more nighttime. Now, in the deep ocean, it always seems like nighttime, right? Because it's constantly dark. But what these bacteria do is it helps with the circadian rhythm of these animals. So if you're not familiar with the circadian rhythm, it's basically it's a sleep cycle. So we have our sleep cycles, and so do these animals as well, and they are nighttime predators. Now, if you're wondering, well, why and how is it important if it's dark all the time in the ocean? How does that help these animals? Well, believe it or not, even though these squid can be found in the deep, they can also live in more shallow areas too. And what these bacteria do is that they slowly wake up our squid by having those bacteria glow. And so they'll glow, meaning that, oh, it's nighttime. And the reason why that's important is because these squid basically use this glowing as a type of camouflage. Kind of weird, right? But if you're glowing, that means you're probably standing out. So how exactly does that work? Well, they use that bacteria as a cloaking device. What they do is these bacteria are highlighting the outside rims of our squid friend right here. And believe it or not, they also use those bacteria, and they can either dim or brighten or kind of move these bacteria around a little bit using their eyes too to look at, well, to the night sky, the way that the night sky and the moonlight is shining into the water. And if it's cloudy or if it's bright, they can change the brightness of these bacteria to help them basically blend into the water. Isn't that cool? So that way they almost look invisible. It's like a cloaking device that they use in the water. So that way it helps them to be able to find a lot of their favorite foods like shrimp and other crustacean friends to be able to gobble them up. Now what's even cooler is that the U.S. Air Force is trying to gain inspiration from our friend right here to figure out, well, how can we use different lighting to help cloak different kinds of airplanes that they use. So it's really neat the way that these bobtail squid are able to use their bioluminescence. Alright, so we've had a chance to talk a lot about different animals and how and why they might use their bioluminescence. But believe it or not, all animals in the deep don't always utilize that living light that's found either from borrowed from other bacteria or from light found within themselves. There are other animals like Cyphonophores that are more passive feeders, and these are animals are related to jellies. And so with these animals, they're actually colonial animals, and these different cells have different responsibilities. Some of them are mainly focused on, well, basically swimming. Others are focused more on feeding. And so all of these colonies of animals work together to be able to provide for the entire animal as a whole, which is really cool to be able to see. And so let's see, I don't know, Cynthia, if you can find the picture of the Cyphonophore. It's the one that's orange and has a black background. They almost look like bells. They're a very unique animal, and actually was a poster that I grew up having on the side of my wall when I was a kid. And believe it or not, I think James, too, also had that same poster, too, at least within his classroom or also maybe growing up as a kid. So let's see if we can bring that up. And in the meantime, I'm going to let you enjoy the bobtail squid.